Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. This is a special edition as Israel's at war, and in this programme we'll be discussing how Christians and Jews can unite in defence of Israel. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guests are Reverend Christopher Wickland from the Living Word Church in Ferrum, together with Sharon Claff from the Jewish community representing Campaign for Truth. So warm welcome to the programme, guys. Sadly, we're recording these programmes under what can only be described as the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, and this, I think, is important to actually state this from the start, that Christians and Jews need to come together in defence of Israel. But I'll start off with you, Chris, because I recorded a Middle East report with you, I think only a few days before that horrendous day on Saturday, the 7th of October. And we did a programme connecting Israel and understanding Israel through biblical archaeology and the importance of biblical archaeology. So unfortunately, that's going to have to be shown at a later date while in this crisis. But what are your thoughts on what can only be described as the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history by Hamas?
Yeah, well, obviously, first of all, I don't even see it as an act of terrorism. I see it as an act of war against a sovereign nation. That's what I think is going on here. And I was just thinking back to the other day when this actually happens, obviously on October the 7th. And it was Saturday morning. And unusually, I was having a lazy morning in bed with my wife, just reading and stuff. And then she looked on the phone, and then she saw the breaking news, what had been happening, how Hamas had attacked Israel. And at first glance, if I'm honest with you, I didn't really quite believe what I was seeing. You know, you get quite normalised to the amount of rocket attacks that get fired into Israel. So initially, I thought, is it just more rocket attacks? But it quite clearly was something a lot more sinister. And as the day progressed, it became quite clear actually what went on and what was going on. And I realised then with horror that this wasn't a terrorist attack. This was an act of war on a sovereign state. And I realised then that this was really deeply serious and deeply dangerous, not just for Israel, but for the wider nation, especially the Middle East as well.
Absolutely. And Sharon, it's great to see you back on the Middle East Report, so thank you for being here. And I think it's very important that you are on today's programme because Christians need to show a greater sense of love and solidarity with Israel and also the Jewish community, particularly at this time of rising Jew hatred. But as a Jewish woman, what are your thoughts on what can only be described as the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, and more Jewish people were massacred on Saturday the 7th of October that we've seen in one single day, not since the Holocaust, and that was over 80 years ago. So please share your thoughts on that horrific day that was Saturday the 7th of October.
So that day was, as you say, it was Shabbat. It was a quiet day. People were resting, people were going to synagogue. And again, Israel was caught on a holiday, on a Jewish holiday, attacked by their enemies. And when I heard what happened, your first thought is, well, they've been doing this for the last few years. They've been throwing rockets across and so on. And then you realize that they came across en masse, and then you see pictures of these little helicopters that they used. And you begin to realize that this was not even an act of war, this was a pogrom. And it was a pogrom of the worst kind, the kind of pogrom that you read about, that happened in Ukraine, that happened in Lithuania and so on in Eastern Europe, that happened to Jews in the 1800s, 1900s. And you didn't think that this could happen again. I couldn't get my head around it, that human beings could behave this way, that they could come across and behave in a way that you can't even call it bestiality, in a sort of medievalist, monstrous way, to slaughter people and then to almost rejoice in it. I believe they were making phone calls home to their parents to say they killed 10 Jews. And Allahu Akbar, and blessing God that they had killed all these Jews. And it made me realize that all the work that I'd done over the last, nearly 2 decades had finally happened. Things that did we think it would be this bad? No, but we knew this day was coming, and you kind of think, well, what are you going to do about it? How is the world going to deal with this? Probably the saddest day of my life. Yeah. Absolutely.
We're in shock and mourning as well, because just what happened was just beyond. Horrific. Words can't really describe what happened. But I mean, Chris, evidence has come to light now that this is the darkest hour in Israel's history. This is the darkest chapter in modern times for the Jewish people, to realize that over 1,400 Israeli citizens were murdered pretty much while they were asleep by over 2,500 Hamas terrorists. We know that some in the region of 240 or 300 Israeli citizens are being kidnapped and taken to Gaza. We know that those who are injured is in the region of over 4,000. Many of them are in a critical situation. Just unpack for us the magnitude of this pogrom, this massacre, this war crime that Hamas has committed.
Yeah, so we need to put this into perspective of actually what happened that morning. So firstly, it was as been said, it was on a Jewish festival, Shabbat. So that's when they every week. So it was a place when they were resting. So the enemy knew that. Yeah,
and it's also Shimhat Torah.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah, and so
receiving of the Torah.
And so the enemy knew that, so they obviously planned it to be a day when they were not ready for this in some respects. I know the military is relatively always prepared. And so it was a sneak attack. You had initially the barrage of 5,000 rockets, or 2,500. The Israelis say that the other side said it was 5,000. So you had that going on, and whilst that was going on, then you had a land invasion. You had Hamas fighters coming in by speedboats and coming onto beaches. You had paragliders coming in by the air. I mean, this is unprecedented. It was a deliberate, willful attack. And then when we hear about indiscriminate shooting down of civilians and all those people at that music festival, soldiers being caught off guard, women, mothers, where their wombs being ripped open, and the things that they did to children. I mean, this is, I think sometimes we become a little bit desensitized to what's going on, with what ISIS did, etc., a few years back. But Israel is the only nation in the Middle East that are a democratic state. And so what we're seeing here is not just an attack on Israel, but we're seeing an attack on democratic freedoms, which we should be paying attention to. And to me, to be honest with you, when I watched what was going on, I couldn't quite get my head around the enormity of it to start with. And as the day unfolded, I began to realize that the magnitude and the evilness of what's going on. And I think we need to remember that, because it's so easy that we forget that, so that we can then turn this around and say, what's going on in Gaza, it's so terrible. And yes, war is terrible, but we have to remember the fact that Israel as a nation were attacked. It was an act of war, and therefore, as a nation, they have the right to defend themselves. And so, as far as I'm concerned, that's something that I think in this show that we need to remind the viewers. We can get lost in the latest media storms and latest media stories, but we need to remember the atrocities that started this all off.
No, absolutely, and I remember just looking at my phone, and there was a couple of videos coming up saying that Hamas terrorists are outside our houses, and seeing those videos, yes, to the extent. And then as the day unfolded, I ended up thinking, I need to get a news source that I can trust, that actually tells me what's actually going on. So I kind of found that I24 was showing live feeds on YouTube. So I was watching those live feeds and those live reports. And when they actually said that Hamas were at between 22 and 27 different locations in southern Israel, that's when I begin to realize this is the magnitude of this, that this wasn't some sort of small terrorist. This wasn't even a 50 or 60 Hamas terrorists, but this was in the region of 2,500, if not more. And the scale of this was absolutely horrific. And you just don't think that Eretz crossing, the crossing between Israel and Gaza, could have been penetrated. It's just unthinkable that no one thought that that was possible. And so therefore, reeling after this. But it's only now come to light now with the evidence of what's happened, shown at places like Kibbutz Be'eri or Kibbutz Kfar Aza, where we see the genocide committed and the crimes committed against humanity are beyond anything that we could possibly imagine anyone can do. So describe your reaction to the attack on those beautiful kibbutzim in the south of Israel, particularly Kibbutz Kfar Aza.
Okay, so you've just said it, around that area of Gaza, the kibbutzim and the villages, and as you know, the kibbutzim is like communal living, where people share, and they're people who respect life, and they look forward to producing a nice life for themselves and for their country. They're not high flyers in the cities and building themselves up ladders, but they're there for community. That's really what a kibbutz is about. And I understand in that area that those kibbutzim used to bring workers from Gaza, lots of workers on their fields and in their farms and so on. And a lot of the women used to look after the children of the workers and the families of the workers and take them to hospitals if they need it, and help educate them. And so they really were a group of people who were integrating between the Arabs and the Jews, integrating a kind of society that we'd all like to live in. And so when they went to bed that night, and the music festival being held there for peace, by the way, when they went to bed at that night, I'm sure that they didn't in their wildest dreams think that this was going to happen to them. And what I've heard that's sort of come out, I can't vouch for the veracity of it, but what I've heard is that the workers who were coming in over a period of about 2 years were collecting data on the people who lived on the kibbutzim. They were sending photographs back to Hamas. They were saying how many people lived in each house, what they were called, and so on. So when they broke in, these hordes had an idea of where they were going to go and who they were going to attack. They must have known that the guard was down. There weren't that many security guards around the area because they trusted the workers and so on. So that kind of shock that came to the people living there, the horror that when they woke up and found themselves being attacked like that, and I can't imagine what they were living through. I've just read a book about the pogroms in Ukraine, and I read also the poem written by Bialik about the Kishinev pogrom, and he wrote of how these people used to come into the villages and how they used to attack and disembowel women, and I mean I can't describe the terrible things they did, but that was in a book, and that was almost a century ago. It was a century ago. Yeah. And who would have thought that in a modern world where we can communicate and we can teach and we can see the good things in life, who would have thought that people would behave this way and where they get it from? And so when I look at the sophistication of this attack, I have to ask, did these people plan it, or who was with them planning it? And then I remembered going back in time, just a couple of months, that the leaders of Hamas were traveling between Moscow and Iran a couple of months ago before this happened. And clearly this has got a hand of Russia and Iran in it. This is not a standalone attack on Jews. This is a standalone attack on Western civilization. And the Jews are taking the butt of it. They're the first line of defense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and also to add to what you're saying, the Israelis actually gave working visas to 17,000 residents of Gaza to improve the economic well-being of the citizens in Gaza, and sadly a horrible price to actually pay for that. So let's have a look at Barry Siegel's report from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and just a warning that what you may see in this news report is very distressing.
The tragedy at Kibbutz Be'eri, like many other places, death and destruction, were so sad. Families, parents, children were all burnt in their homes, babies. This is what you're seeing, and this is so sad, so heartbreaking, so sad. Everybody, it's so tragic, it's heartbreaking. People that were murdered in their homes, blood all over the floor in these homes, people burnt alive. It's so sad. The parents, the children, the babies that were killed here at Kibbutz Be'eri, we want to rebuild. Our hearts go out for all these families. In their memory, may we rebuild Kibbutz Be'eri and all the other southern communities. So sad, so tragic.
There's Lego pieces.
You can catch
Yeah.
the feeling.
So yeah, share with people to know what happened here.
Yeah,
And-
so my mom's place, maybe you should show it with the context of the other four.
Yeah.
Was one of four houses that I don't know how to call these. They're not human. They're not people. They held hostage in four different houses in this neighborhood specifically, and this is what's left of it. And her neighbor, sure.
Yeah. Was this the house with the 8?
You see,
Wow.
it's burned upstairs.
Yeah.
It was a living room. It's like a unit for guests, for the youngsters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were hiding outside.
Wow.
Upstairs, I mean.
Wow.
And it just burned them alive.
These were like teenagers, like children,
And the mother.
and a mother. Yeah. Okay.
It's horrific. You come from the other side.
It's crazy.
I'd like to thank Barry Siegel from Vision for Israel for that very excellent but also very troubling and disturbing report. And correction, that was Kibbutz Be'eri rather than Kibbutz Kfar Asher. Chris, now what do you make of that video? Because when you're looking at that news report and you see Kibbutz Be'eri and you see how this beautiful kibbutz was destroyed, all you can think of is like, this is something out of the Holocaust. This is something that we didn't think we'd ever see in our lifetime, but we saw it on Saturday the 7th of October. Your thoughts?
Watching that video, again, they've obviously tried to keep it as clean as they can, but it says enough, you know, where you just see where the children were, you see some toys, and then you just get this horrible picture that it all looks very close to our houses, and there's a dishwasher there with the door open with the plates in. It's little things like that bring it home, in the sense of this could have happened. You know, that could be my children, this could be my family, and it helps you identify with it. And I just appalled. I'm shocked. I'm grieved. I'm just angry, you know, at the things that I've seen. And what's concerning me is how quickly everyone has moved on from that now. Now it's like, well, you know, Israel should do things that are proportionate. Are we now going too far and so on? But people need to remember, you know, where this began. So it's like with the Americans. You know, you remember Pearl Harbor, you know, or in December 1941, over nearly 2,500 people were killed that day by an attack on Japan, and it was considered an act of war, and it changed the Second World War. The Americans got involved. But no one then said to them, you know, make sure you do a proportionate response, because it was an act of war. And I think images like this are good to refresh us of how this began and why we're in what we're doing. And Israel has every right, I personally believe, to go into Gaza to do what they need to do. And I know that raises lots of questions, but at the end of the day, a state was attacked in a brutal and barbaric and almost like medieval kind of way, and things that we would not expect. And we expect in today's so-called civilized society, you know, there are rules of war, there are rules of engagement, and none of those were employed. It was, let's attack women, let's attack children, let's decapitate babies, let's burn people, let's burn children. This is despicable, and it's disgusting.
And of course the mass rapings that took place as well, and then the mutilations and the torture, and how they actually found manuals of torture on some of the Hamas terrorists as well. So I mean, it's just beyond horrific. But yeah, Sharon, we know that this shocks, and rightly so, it shocked the nation of Israel, it shocked world Jewry. Israel is still in a state of shock, it's still reeling. But now they are united in their resolve to support the Israeli Defense Force to destroy Hamas in Gaza. Share how important it is to have a united front at this time, after all the divisions that we've seen in the past year prior to Saturday the 7th of October.
Okay, so you know, Israel has had its internal struggles for the last year with all the demonstrations that were going on, and a lot of people saying they won't do their reserve duty, they're not going to fly aeroplanes, and this huge divide down the country, almost 50-50 on either side. And I would imagine that Israel's enemies saw this as a sign of weakness. It clearly appeared to them that Israel was never going to come together like they have in all the other wars and attacks that they've had. And within a couple of hours, all of that dissipated, and they all came together. And you see here again the Israel that we all know, the Israel of the 1940s, 1950s, where they came together to build a nation. And you see that nation now as a strong, powerful nation, a compassionate nation, a nation that works together to look after its people. And I know there's a bit of criticism about how long did it take the army to come in, but as information's coming out, when we see the way this attack was coordinated, how they knocked out the communications and the protection of the fence, and how I understand that there's a team of army women who look at monitors, and that's their job, to report back what they see, and they were seeing this happen. And reporting back, but the message wasn't being received because the tower was knocked out. And apparently they were saying, where are you? We're seeing Hamas here, we're seeing this, we're seeing rockets, and where are you? And so all of that, there's obviously going to be an inquiry, but you see how people got together. They drove from the north. There are reports of people hearing about it, getting in their cars and driving all the way down south to see what they could do to help. And this is the nation of Israel. This is how Israelis come together and work together as a team. And hopefully they're going to look forward to rebuilding that nation. And without Hamas in the way, without Gaza being such a threat to their very existence. What's going to happen with Hezbollah? Well, that's still going to unfold, I think.
Yeah, but also the other dynamic which makes things very difficult for the IDF, isn't it, is the fact that there are between 240 and 300 hostages. And
Yes.
This was part of the Hamas plan back in 2014 with the terror tunnels that they planned to attack neighboring kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip, to kill as many Israeli civilians as possible and to take a number of hostages back into Gaza. Now, this is the nightmare scenario that Israel's dealing with.
So what I understand, that clearly the world is looking at Israel and condemning Israel, as Chris said, about proportionality. So we know that's ridiculous, because they're not going to rape and kill as many Gazan people as they kill Jews. That's a crazy notion. They're not going to do any of that stuff. But what they've done is they've divided Gaza in half. They've hopefully seen over 1 million Gazans out of the way to the south, where they can be fed and looked after. And then they've gone around, because of this tunnel network and because of the hostages, they clearly can't bomb or flush out these tunnels. So what they've done is they've divided it into enclaves. So they're watching each little enclave, and hopefully those terrorists who are holed like cowards down in their bunkers are going to have to come up at some stage. They're going to have to come up for air, and that'll put an end to it. They'll arrest them. Clearly a lot of them will die, because there'll be a lot of shooting going on. And they'll arrest them, and then it's up to Israel, leading the way, to decide what are they going to do with them, how are they going to plan a future where this kind of thing can't be rebuilt. How are they going to deal with a population that is schooled on hating Jews to such an extent that they behave in the most monstrous way in order to get rid of Jews? And how are they going to deal with an ideology that propagates this? And this is where I think the difficulty is going to lie in not only Israel, but the whole world, deciding what are they going to do with this ideology that says that there should be no Jews in the world, and an ideology of submission.
So let's remind ourselves of who Hamas are, and this is courtesy of our friends in the Israeli Defense Force.
10 facts about Hamas. The Hamas terrorist organization controls Gaza and has not been elected into office in 17 years. Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization by the US,
terrorist organization,
Canada, Australia, the UK, and many other countries.
Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Hamas receives an annual budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, but unfortunately they invested in terrorism rather than in electricity and running water for the people of Gaza. Hamas carried out the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history, killing over 1,300 civilians and injuring thousands. This was the largest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Hamas is responsible for numerous suicide bombings, shootings, and stabbing attacks, resulting in the murders of thousands of civilians, both Israeli and Palestinian. A large amount of building materials enter Gaza from Israel, more than 3.5 million tons of construction material in 2016 alone. However, a significant portion never makes it to the people of Gaza, as Hamas diverts it to building terrorist tunnels, rockets, and other weapons. Hamas leaders embed themselves in civilian areas, using the people of Gaza as human shields, knowing the IDF attempts to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas tortures and systematically oppresses LGBTQ+ individuals, going as far as throwing people off a building. The majority of Hamas leaders are convicted or wanted murderers. Hamas was created as an extreme offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood.
And that was courtesy of the IDF, and it's important that we know and remember who Hamas are. They are a genocidal terrorist organisation that's committed not only to Israel's destruction, but also for the eradication of Jewish people around the world. And their covenant charter is very similar to that of the Hitler's book himself that he wrote, Mein Kampf. Chris, there are lots of Christians particularly playing this moral equivalence game that this is Israel, this is Hamas in Gaza. They are both at fault. Just explain to us from a theological position why we need to be on Israel and why we need to support the Jewish people.
Okay. So to answer that question, I'm going to look firstly answer it from a historical point of view. So as I mentioned earlier, we look on the attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941. As I said, we had 2,403 people that were killed by those Japanese attacks. And we saw that attack then led America to war with Japan, and we saw their proportion response to that. And we get a lot of media, a lot of people, a lot of Christians saying there should be a reasonable and proportional response. However, that kind of approach works on individuals, so it's like a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye kind of mentality. But you can't apply that same kind of logic when it comes to an act of war or an act of terrorism against a nation or against a sovereign state. So we have to see it from that angle as well. And I don't believe that a lot of Christians have thought this whole thing through about moral equivalence, like I said, which is really a form of eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Because when you're dealing with attacks against a nation, this opens up a whole nother can of worms that's beyond a simplistic, you shot me, I'm going to shoot you sort of thing. We need to remind ourselves that Israel is this sovereign state that is surrounded by enemies that have a totalitarian mindset. And their mindset is that Israel has no right to exist. They have no right to exist at all. They want them off the map. And so we keep saying things with, well, let's have a peace solution. But what people forget is Israel has offered 5 times a peace solution to the Arabs. And each time they've basically turned it down. The reason why people like Hezbollah, PLO, and Hamas do not want peace with Israel, and they do not want a two-state solution, is because they hate Israel and they want Israel wiped off the map. Now, when you have that totalitarian mindset, you can't reason with people like that. You can't negotiate with people like that. You can't make peace with people like that. And so this whole let's do things in a proportional response is a very westernized way of thinking. You committed a war crime, and this sort of stuff. You can't reason with people who have a totalitarian mindset that just want to do one thing, and that is destroy Israel at whatever cost. And that's something that I think that Christians probably need to get a grasp of here.
Also, this is making Fatah, the PLO, Hamas leaders billionaires.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're profiteering out of this conflict as well. I think we've seen news reports over the last couple of days of how the Hamas leadership are living in Doha, in Qatar, in incredible rich, in luxuries, in the expensive homes and houses, and literally they are billionaires, which should be given to the people and the residents of Gaza, which they're taking for themselves. So they are profiteering out of terrorism and chaos.
And they don't live in Gaza.
Exactly.
They all live in Qatar.
Yep.
So they're in no danger. They're taking the cash, they're giving the instructions, and they're getting their own people killed. They're getting their babies slaughtered that everybody's blaming Israel for.
Right,
and they're living in 6-star accommodation in a wonderful life. And that cash is coming from Europe, from America, from Britain. It's not earned cash. It's donations from our countries. So there's a job for us to do to make sure that we don't make them rich. We need to get a government that says no cash for you anymore. We're going to stop this pay for slave money.
Absolutely. So let's go and see what's actually happening now inside of Gaza as Israel's launched its military operation to surround Gaza City. And this is how Hamas are actually using and firing rockets and missiles from a mosque, and also firing rockets and missiles from a children's play area.
מצאנו פה עמדה של שיגור של רקטות, כנראה מחולק ל2 של 5 ו5, אפשר לראות כאן כל הרקטות כבר נורו. מכוונים לכיוון צפון, בתוך שטח הארץ. זה החשמל, והחשמל הזה נכנס עד לתוך המבנה הזה, שהוא בעצם מסגד שממנו מפעילים את הרקטות.
אנחנו נמצאים בשבט צופים של צפון הרצועה. אפשר לראות פה את השמות, אפשר לראות פה את כל התמונות סדר של הצופים הנחמדים, ובתוך השבט עצמו אפשר לראות פה, בואו, אפשר לראות פה מוטוללים רקטות בנות בכל הנראה, או לאשקלון או למרחב הצפון, ממש בתוך השבט צופים.
And those very important and significant videos filmed inside Gaza by the IDF, and it's courtesy of the IDF that we have them, won't be shown, I guarantee, on any of our major news networks, but just shows you how Hamas break the Geneva Convention, how they use women and children as human shields, probably even hostages as human shields. But we saw there an incredibly sophisticated rocket missile system built within a mosque, because we know that if Israel targeted mosque, this will bring international condemnation against Israel, and we see that would also cause a huge rise in Jew hatred, and this is what they do deliberately. Sharon, it's so important that we show what we just showed there, because I haven't seen anything like that on Sky News. I certainly wouldn't see it on BBC or ITN, and it's so important to put this into context because it shows what Israel is dealing with. And to see then, for example, that Hamas fire their rockets and missiles in a children's play area, but also from a mosque as well. Now, it was an incredibly sophisticated rocket and missile system that they've been firing Ashkelon into northern Israel from the actual mosque, that we actually show what Hamas is doing.
So the mainstream media, certainly here in the UK, is not something you use to get information from. Increasingly, particularly the BBC, has become an organisation that gives opinion rather than news. And we've known that a long time. You know that in 2015 we did that huge programme about the BBC, where we hoped that it might change if they changed their complaint system to take it outside of the BBC. But here they are in 2023 with the biggest crime committed in the world since the Holocaust, and they can't use the word terrorist when it relates to Gazans killing Jews. They can use terrorists about Africa, about anywhere else, but they cannot use the word terrorist. So I don't think anybody who is thoughtful relies on the mainstream media for their news. They look to podcasts, they look to I-24 about Israel, they look to the internet to find information.
Hopefully this program as well.
And this program as well. Increasingly, I have to tell you, over this period, popping up on my feed constantly is Revelation TV. So we look to people who care about what happens in our world to produce information that we can consume and rely on. And yes, mainstream media, I think it's probably coming to the end of its life. And we wouldn't see that, what you've just shown on any of those. And so what happens is you're getting on the mainstream media a group of people who are new to the topic, who have just learned to slogan because they're now hearing it on the streets. They've never been out there before. They've been asked for their opinions, and they've suddenly got this narrative about from the river to the sea, Israel will be free. And they've done what happened in roughly 2007 when we first went on the streets against the budding BDS. And if a stranger walked past and saw them, they would see a group of people who have got a slogan and a flag. And the slogan says that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And then they look to us and they see us with our blue and white flags. We've got no slogan. We've got nothing except our blue and white flags and our history. But we haven't prepared this narrative. And they rightly think to themselves, well, here's a place called Palestine that needs to be free, and then those people must clearly not want to free it. And if we fast forward to now, what we've got are people who are buying into those slogans. They don't know the history, they don't know their Bible because they're all secular. They haven't learned the history of the Jews and how Christianity and the Judeo-Christian ethic has come to be what is the civilized world. And they're talking about this massacre as though it's just nothing. It didn't really happen. And here we've got Gazans who are suffering, and we need to give them humanity, and we need to give them their state. They need their state because there's an occupation going on. So you have these words, occupation, river to the sea, settlers, they're all popping up on mainstream media, and the general public have no means of knowing that this is propaganda.
I listened to one BBC 5 Live report, and they had an expert talking about the situation in the north with Hezbollah, and they referred to Hezbollah as a group. Can you believe that?
Yes, I can.
You think this is like a group of musicians they've got together and forming a band?
Yeah.
When they're a genocidal terrorist organisation, horrific. And also call out one of the BBC's chief security correspondent, didn't know anything about the history of Hamas when he was asked about it.
That's right.
So, you know, and anything that goes out, I have to verify, I have to get the facts right, otherwise I won't put it out, which is so important when it comes to integrity and the integrity of reporting.
Yeah.
But Chris, moving on to a kind of more spiritual aspect, we know that this situation that Israel's facing is increasingly more complicated due to the large number of hostages that Hamas have. How imperative is it that Christians pray for the hostages, but also pray for the protection of the IDF soldiers, and which many are Messianics who are actually serving on the front line and have gone into Gaza?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, firstly, biblically, the Bible from the Torah is very clear that to kidnap someone is a crime that deserves the death penalty. It's an attack against people's humanity. It's an attack against their human rights, and it's a crime against humanity itself. And so we do need to pray for those people that have been taken by Hamas, and we do need to pray for the IDF soldiers that are going into those tunnel networks. Now, what probably here in the West we don't quite conceive is these are not just, I don't know, a few 100 foot of tunnels. These are miles and miles and miles of tunnels, and lots of them all splintering off. And they're not small, narrow things. You know, you can walk around quite comfortably in some of these tunnels. And then imagine being in that scenario as a soldier with not knowing where you're going, to the left or to the right, and what could be around that, tripwires. You could have people there ready to shoot you and stuff. So yes, absolutely, we need to pray. At our church, we have a house of prayer. And so every week we've been praying for Israel and for what's going on there on the ground. And I think Christians need to do this, need to be involved, need to be spiritually supporting Israel. I know Israel can be difficult for some people because it can be difficult from a political point of view. Personally, I don't have an issue with it. But biblically, you know, there's no grounds why you can't support Israel. And of course, the problem is with probably the majority of Western Christianity, certainly here in Britain, is that they have quite liberalized theology, and therefore our replacement in their theology, replacement theology is where they believe that the church has replaced Israel, where there's not a single verse in the New Testament that even says that. And a quick glance through Romans chapters 9 through to 11 makes it perfectly clear that God...
I don't like those chapters, by the way.
Yeah, but God hasn't finished with Israel.
Absolutely.
And He has a plan for Israel, and He has a plan for the church. And as Paul says in those chapters, he says, has God forsaken His chosen people? And he says, you know, God forbid. And he then goes on to say that how he prays for his people daily. So if it's good enough for the Apostle Paul theologically to pray for Israel, then it's good enough for me to pray for Israel. And as a church, we stand with Israel. We pray for Israel. We support Magen David Adom so that we can practically support Israel as well.
That's wonderful, and I wish there were more churches like yours. So if anyone's in the Fareham area and looking for a Bible-believing church that loves Israel, Chris is your man. Sharon, I mean, one thing we have seen, haven't we, with this conflict so far is it's been exported to the West. It's been exported to Britain. I mean, literally, whilst the Israelis were still trying to round up the Hamas terrorists who were still in Israel to clear the area of southern Israel from Hamas terrorists, we saw that the pro-Palestinian demonstrators were demonstrating before even Israel launched any military offensive against Hamas in Gaza. And what we've seen, really, according to the Security Trust, is a 537% increase in recorded anti-Semitic instances over the past 4 or 5 weeks. And this is up from 160 this time last year. So just share with us the magnitude of this Jew hatred that now seems to be completely out of control. And we haven't seen anything like this on this scale really since the 1930s.
Okay, so this didn't come out of a vacuum. This, as they say, it's exported from Israel, but it's been building here. It's been building here since 2001, I would say, following the Durban conference and the formation of the BDS in roughly 2005. They've been building for this, they've been waiting for it. And so these masses that appear on our streets didn't come out of nowhere. There's been an industry where the BDS has become a brand across the world, and where they are clearly very financed. They have huge sums of money. So it didn't come out of nowhere. And it's a very dangerous entity that is here, infiltrated in our society, infiltrated into our government, our schools, our industry, in almost every aspect of society. This is infiltrated, backed by huge sums of money, and I would hazard a guess that the Muslim Brotherhood is behind a lot of it. So we have people talking about solutions and how we're going to resolve this. We go back to the press and we're having meetings. We had last week question time, where the Jewish community was represented, most inadequately. There was a little bit of talk about the horror that took place, and then the talk went on to Israel and the damage that Israel is doing to people. And the suggestion came from the leader of the Jewish community that we should have negotiations and reach a two-state solution following this incident that's going to obviously come to an end. And I thought to myself, wasn't Gaza something like a two-state solution? And what came out of it? What happened when they had their independence? They were given a strip of land, which is ostensibly a country for whoever was living there. They were given independence. When the Jews, 8,000 Jews, were pulled out of the area, they were left with greenhouses, farms, houses, buildings, empty synagogues for them to create as mosques. And what did they do? Within 24 hours, they had desecrated the lot, pulled it apart, burnt the farms, and then taken aid to build up this entity. And here we've got not only a Jewish community, but we've got a Western world talking about a two-state solution. It defies logic. So the West itself is facing a huge crisis, an enormous crisis against the Judeo-Christian Western civilization. And yes, Israel's going to survive. Israel's going to do a good job. They're going to survive. They're going to rebuild. They're going to be united. But where is that going to leave the West? Where is it going to leave everybody here who's... I have people phoning me and commiserating with me and saying they know how I must feel, and I'm very grateful that they do call me. But they have children who are here. They have children who are going to face this crisis at some stage, and I don't know how the world is going to cope with it, because it's so huge that on Remembrance Day they're going to have this million-man march or million-person march on a day when everybody in the United Kingdom should be together. They shouldn't be marching for anything. They should be there together, wearing their poppies and thinking about how is it that we have this freedom that was created by the people we lost, who fought for it, our ancestors who battled for it, the grandfathers and the grandmothers who fought.
Absolutely.
So how are they going to cope with it? Are they going to call the army in?
Well, I think we're facing the same Nazi-esque ideology on our streets in London. And Chris, I was sharing before the programme about been involved in a speaking engagement with ICJ UK, and that was in Westminster, and then just literally walking into what I can only describe as a hate fest, a Palestinian hate fest. I mean, it felt like you were coming face to face with evil. I always wondered what it would be like to be in Germany, in Munich in the 1930s with the Nazi rallies. It felt exactly like that. And so we know that from history that what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. Yeah. And if Christians are sitting on the fence, they're indifferent, they're apathetic, then the horrors that befell Israel will come to our nation, our society in the West. Share with us how imperative it is that Christians wake up to what is essentially the rise of evil that we haven't seen really since the 1930s with the rise of Nazism.
Yeah. Yeah, no, firstly, I agree with what Sharon's saying, that this has been here already brewing away under the surface for quite some time, and I think it's going to take a lot of people by surprise what we're seeing on the news with these protests and the Palestinian protests that we're seeing. But basically, and this is another thing as well, is that politicians are aware that this is being brewing, but they haven't spoken out about it. They haven't put their head above the parapet, because as far as they're concerned, it's political suicide to be able to talk on these issues, because they would be deemed racist or, you know, Islamophobic, etc. But what we've got as well going on right now in our country is that we've got a radicalisation of our youth. So thanks to Marxist ideology and critical race theory that's being taught in our colleges, in our universities, you've got a predominant group of young people that think anyone who is white is racist. And therefore, the very tenets of critical race theory looks for a victim and looks for the perpetrator and the enemy. And so people like Christians and Jews, we are so-called the white man religion that suppressed the nation, and the Arabs are the underdogs. And now we're seeing the ugly truth of this thing come about. And so these these protests we're seeing in our streets, I think is not too dissimilar as what we saw in Nazi Germany. And I think if this nation is not careful, we are literally sleepwalking into a real nasty culture war, because there is a war that's coming, and it started now in Israel and with Gaza, but you're now seeing the ideology of that now coming to the West as well. And it's a totalitarian Marxist culture that thinks, that hates everything to do with Christianity, hates to do anything to do with Judaism, hates the Western culture and all that it stands for, and wants to bring in this new culture. And so they're siding with the Muslims, not realizing that the very things that they're standing for could be the very thing that could destroy them as well.
Absolutely, and we haven't got long left of the programme, about a minute left or so, Sharon. So within 30 seconds, how important is it that Christians show comfort and solidarity, not only with Israel, but also with our beleaguered Jewish community in this country, as a representative of the Jewish community?
Okay, so I've spent my life trying to work out how the Holocaust happened. And on the 7th of October, I realized how the Holocaust happened. And that's because very many good people remain silent out of fear. Sometimes because they secretly agreed with the autocratic tenet that was being proposed. So how important is it? It's desperately important that Christians, Jews, and everybody comes together and works together to resolve this.
So Sharon and Chris, thank you so much for doing a great job on today's Middle East Report under very difficult circumstances. And I just want to thank you for watching at home. We have this very powerful video to show you now that's produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that names all the victims of the Hamas terrorist attack on Saturday, the 7th of October. Pause and pray for Israel during this time. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.